All right, and I'm recording now. So, hi everyone. Welcome to Palo Alto University's October open house. This hour-long session will be about our PsyD program. And to start off with some introductions, my name is Robin. I'm a senior admissions counselor here at PAU. And if you have any admissions questions or program related questions, you would be connecting with me. And I will have my email at the end, so you connect with me at a later time. And then I'm also joined by a current student, is Kirsten, that's also joining us.
Kirsten, yeah.
Kirsten, thank you. What year are you in the program currently?
I'm a fourth year.
Fourth year, awesome. Thank you for joining us. And then we also have Dr. Kent, which Dr. Kent will make their introductions in a few minutes. And so I sort of want to go over the agenda today. We will be going over a PowerPoint, and Dr. Kent will be talking about the program and everything you need to know, as well as I'll be going over some admissions requirements and information. And following that, it will also be questions at the end. However, if you do have questions during the PowerPoint, feel free to write them in the chat. I'll be monitoring them. Kirsten will also be monitoring those as well. However, if we don't get to the question, I'll make sure to mention it at the end with Dr. Kent. However, my email will be at the end. So if you don't get your questions answered today, I will connect with you via email or even a meeting to discuss your own personal background and such. So yeah, without further ado, I will start sharing the PowerPoint, and then Dr. Kent, you could take it away.
Great. Hi, everyone. I am Jamie Kent, and I'm really happy to be here today. And it's a beautiful sunny day. I don't know if you're all in California in the Bay Area, but just a beautiful sunny day here today. So it's nice to have so many of you joining us. I am the Associate Director of Training for the PsyD program, and my photo is in this PowerPoint slide. And I've been involved with the program for over 10 years, so very familiar with our training model and our team and our wonderful students. And shout out to Kirsten for joining today too. Again, it's a beautiful day here. So in terms of the other members of our team, our Director of Training is Dr. Kimberly Hill. She's been the director for a number of years. We have Dr. Pete Aston and myself are the co-associate directors of training. And then we have our practicum coordinator, Kayla Jimenez, and I also serve as a practicum coordinator. And then Dr. Stacy Lynn is our DEI advisor for the program. And then, not to be confused, our other Stacy Boyko, is our program manager. So we have a great leadership team. Okay, so we'll dig in a little bit with an overview of the program. The program was founded in 2002. We're actually celebrating our 21st year of the program. We just had a faculty retreat last week, and we were celebrating being officially 21. And the program is a consortium, which is actually fairly unusual for a doctoral training program. I don't think that there are many that exist as of today. And it is a joint program between both Palo Alto University and then Stanford's Department of Psychiatry in the School of Medicine at Stanford. So the program is really designed to be split 50-50 between both partner institutions, so PAU and then Stanford's Department of Psychiatry. It is a PsyD program, so it is a practitioner-scholar model, and we're really committed to the clinical training aspect of the doctoral degree in clinical psychology. So some of you may be debating between PsyD or PhD. Some of you may end up applying to both. We definitely see applicants that do apply to both. And this program, I would say, is really designed for those that are really interested in the delivery model in terms of the practitioner-scholar piece. We've been APA accredited since 2006, and it is a 5-year full-time residential, so meaning in person here in the Bay Area program. Consortium identity, I think, is that our first year cohort? It may be. It's hard for me to see everybody's faces. But yeah, so we have our identity, which is interesting because we have the PAU piece and then the Stanford piece. And I think depending on where you're at in the program, you can have a unique identity to either partner. So early on in the program, as we'll see in a future slide, you're going to be pretty heavily focused on classes. And so at that time, you may feel more connected to PAU. And then as students become more involved in clinical research, depending on which partner institution they are conducting that research at, or maybe even clinical work at, you may have a stronger identity with one partner over the other. And that can vary across your time in the program. So consortium students in terms of identity are full-time registered Palo Alto University students. So your diploma will come from Palo Alto University, and you attend a 50% Stanford affiliated PsyD program. The affiliation with Stanford is not through Stanford University, it's through Stanford's Department of Psychiatry, which is in the School of Medicine at Stanford. And each partner institution does contribute to every aspect of the program. So as I mentioned earlier, 50%, we really try to divide things 50% between each partner institution. So you'll see that your classes will be taught by half PAU faculty and then half Stanford faculty. There are research opportunities at both institutions. And then dissertations do need to have one member of each partner institution. So for example, if your chair of your dissertation is at Stanford, which is actually fairly common for our students, and I think that's because the Department of Psychiatry really is involved in clinically applied research, and our students are interested in the application of theoretical concepts in practice. And so you might see, for example, a study on a new treatment for trauma with adolescents. And so students get involved in that research because there's this application piece that they're really interested in. And so their dissertation chair becomes a Stanford faculty member. Then the other representative, your reader on your dissertation committee, must be from the other institution, Palo Alto University, or the reverse would be true if you had a PAU chair. So really trying to intentionally make sure that every aspect of the program represents each partner. So as I mentioned, this is a 5-year residential program. Let's see. So in terms of your first 3 years, the first 3 years are pretty heavily focused on the didactic coursework. So you're in-class instruction. Year 1 is very heavily focused on didactic instruction. Year 2 and 3 are a little bit lighter. Year 3 has more electives, whereas the first 2 years have more required coursework. But you will be in classes for those first 3 years. In addition, you will advance to candidacy, meaning that you'll earn your master's degree, Master's of Science, and advance to your doctoral degree in the beginning of year 3. And in order to do that, you will complete and pass 3 comprehensive exams. And rather than have one really large exam, we have broken the exam up into 3 different components. And they're sort of spaced out over those first 3 years. So every program might be a little bit different in terms of their competency exams. So for us, we have an assessment sequence where you're in an assessment class the entire year for year 1. And then at the end of that year 1, you'll take a comprehensive exam on assessment. And then in year 2, you'll have a statistics sequence that entire year. And then you'll take a statistics exam, comprehensive exam at the end of that year. And then in the fall, at the very beginning of year 3, you'll take a clinical comprehensive exam. And so the assessment, statistics, and clinical comprehensive exams are the 3 components. And when you pass all 3, typically in the fall of your 3rd year, you will earn your Master of Science in Clinical Psychology from PAU, and you'll officially advance to candidacy as a doctoral student, on track to earn your PsyD later in the program. That's the coursework. In addition to the coursework, of course, you're doing clinical work as well. And so you'll see that in year 1, there is no assigned practicum work in that year. Our practicum work comes into play during year 2, 3, and 4. So in those 3 years, you will be engaged in what we call a primary practicum placement. And typically the primary practicum ranges from 16 to 24 hours per week. Some of those practica are located within our institution. So within PAU, within Stanford, we have a partnering relationship with the Palo Alto VA. So we have placements there as well. And then many of our placements are outside of our institutions in the larger Bay Area, and we have many different types of practicum placements. In addition to those foundational practicum placements that you'll be completing in years 2, 3, and 4, throughout our program, including during first year, students are able to engage in what we call a supplemental practicum. And we call it a supplemental because it's optional and it's not required. And the idea is that it can enhance students' training in some way. It allows students to potentially explore an area of interest, maybe working with a patient population, or working in a particular setting, or doing a certain type of intervention that they might not have had exposure to or will not have exposure to perhaps in a primary placement, but they'd like to dip their toes in with a supplemental placement. The supplemental placement is not nearly the same commitment as a primary placement. So supplementals are typically between 4 to 8 hours per week, in contrast to that 16 to 24 hours. And most of our students do tend to get involved with these smaller placements. I would say on average, students could complete maybe 2 to 3 of them over the course of their time in the program. And then in addition to practicum, the dissertation comes into play during year 3. In year 3, you will get involved with your dissertation, propose the dissertation, and then typically in year 4 or 5, you will defend your dissertation. We've had a lot of success in recent years with our students defending prior to leaving for internship, which is amazing if students are able to do that. And then year 5, of course, is the APA accredited internship, so the final piece in the degree plan. Okay, this is just a little more nuanced in terms of our the 5-year plan, and just a slicing and dicing a different way here. So this is a list of actually the courses that are offered across the 5 years. So again, in this slide, you can see that for the first year, it really is much more heavily focused. The curriculum is much more heavily focused on classwork because you're not necessarily engaged in practicum yet, not necessarily engaged in research yet. And so students typically are taking about 5 classes per quarter. The quarter system was new to me when I joined PAU. For some of you, you've maybe been in semester systems. The quarters really do move quite quickly at about 10 to 12 weeks. And so you're really jumping into the content quickly, moving through it quickly, and then of course you're moving on to the next quarter. And then in the second year you'll see that there's still a fair amount of required coursework, but that is the year that first primary practicum comes into play. And so there's not quite as much in terms of the number of classes. It's typically 3 to 4 classes per quarter. And then in the third year, it's a much lighter class load in the third year. The classes that you're taking at that point are largely elective classes. And so the elective students have choice in terms of what areas of interest they would like to engage in terms of the curriculum. And so those classes are also much smaller. For your first 2 years, you're taking all of the same classes with your cohort. We do have a cohort model where we typically bring in 30 students each academic year into our program. And then you'll take a set curriculum in your first and second years together. And then in that third year, that's when there's a little bit more choice, and there could be some branching off between students in terms of which courses they're choosing to take. And as a result, instead of having 30 students in your class, you could have, maybe 8 to 20 in your class, depending on the elective that you take. The third year is also when that dissertation comes into play in the third year. One of the cool things about our dissertation process, you'll see across that year, the third year, is that we do offer a dissertation prep class. And we think that this contributes to our large success in many students defending their dissertations prior to heading to internship. It's almost like a group therapy for completing your dissertation, where there's a faculty mentor working with small groups of students, typically about 8 to 10 students in a group. And the idea is to not only have the faculty member talk about how to stay on track with the dissertation and help with dissertation ideas and formatting and content, but also to help the students to sort of stay accountable with each other as they're moving through the process. And so that's been a curriculum add that we think is quite valuable to the students and does occur in that third year. And then in the spring of third year, flowing into the fall of fourth year, we have a class called internship prep, which is similar to dissertation prep, but this is much more focused on helping our students prepare for their internship application. So the internship application is typically due in the fall of the fourth year. And our students are able to receive a lot of guidance from faculty members, and including an individual assigned coach for each student who's applying for internship, to help students prepare their materials, consider where they would like to apply to train for that internship training year, and really, answer any questions that students might have. We're actually in the middle of that right now, and Kirsten is working on that process. So she's in the heart of it. Our applications are due November 1st. So our fourth year students are busy applying, and hopefully, Kirsten, you can enjoy the sunny weather this weekend. And then let's see, practicum in the fourth year, and then fifth year is the doctoral internship. Our students are required to complete an internship at an APA accredited internship site. And the reason we require an APA accredited internship site is that it doesn't limit students in their future career choices. There are some organizations, institutions that do require, for hiring purposes, that you've completed your internship at an APA accredited site. And so we do require that as part of our program. Practicum opportunities. As one of the practicum coordinators for a number of years, I feel like there are a number of things that are great about our program, and the practicum training is certainly one of them. I trained in the Chicago area, and I think we had 3 practicum sites to choose from, or that we could train at. Whereas for our students, they're able to train at over 40 different practicum sites. They won't, of course, train at 40. You'll train at 3 in years 2, 3, and 4. But there are a lot of options. So sort of the sky's the limit in terms of student interests and trying to find a good fit with what you'd like to sort of dive into. As I mentioned earlier, the way that our practicum training works is students are able to get involved in our supplemental or smaller practicum opportunities right away, and throughout their time in the program. So that's available years 1 through 4. And again, those are typically around, I would say about 4 to 8 hours. It could be less than that, but that's more, the typical range is about 4 to 8 hours per week. And there's so many cool research opportunities at Stanford where faculty are looking for students to get involved to help with the evaluation for a research study, or perhaps the intervention side of a research study. And our students are able to get these supplemental practica experiences in that way. And then we have, as mentioned earlier, our foundational practicum. And that's the first primary practicum is year 2. And those practicum do take place in year 2 internally for us. And we feel like that's very important to have the first full practicum year, again, a larger commitment, 16 to 20 hours typically in year 2, be housed within our walls where we can really ensure adequate supervision, making sure that students are seeing clients that are appropriate to their level of training. Sometimes students come into our program with a master's degree, and so perhaps have had a little bit more training experience or clinical experience. Sometimes students enter the program straight from undergrad, so have not had that experience. And so we want to make sure that for each student in that first primary practicum, we're setting them up for success. And really the focus in our practicum training is on evidence-based interventions. That's a pillar of our program that we want students to be getting trained in what the current evidence base and research suggests is the best treatment for various types of clinical presentations. So during that first training year, first primary practicum training year in year 2, students have the opportunity to potentially train at our in-house low-fee psychology training clinic at Palo Alto University. And that clinic is called the Gronowski Center. And it is a community-based agency that serves the population in the Mountain View, Los Altos, Southern Bay area. Although with the introduction of virtual services during COVID, I know now that we're also reaching people throughout the state of California, still largely based in the Bay Area, but we're able to access more people. And you can see sort of the run of the gamut in terms of clinical presentations, seeing age across the lifespan, various race, ethnicity, gender identity, those sorts of things. It really is quite varied. Within the Gronowski Center, there are 2 different specialty clinics that we have, and sometimes our students come in with interest in our specialty clinics and are able to train in those specialty areas right away in year 2. And the 2 specialty clinics are, first, the Sexual and Gender Identity Clinic, SGIC is the acronym. And our Sexual and Gender Identity Clinic is working with individuals of marginalized gender or sexual identities and providing care for them. And then our second specialty clinic housed within the Gronowski Center is Clinica Latina, which serves a Spanish-speaking population. Tends to see folks across the lifespan in that clinic. And I believe Kirsten trained there, so maybe if there are specific questions about that clinic, she might be able to answer them. And then the last placement that's available in that year 2 for our students that is also internal to us is the Palo Alto VA's mental health clinic. And the mental health clinic at the Palo Alto VA is essentially the first point of contact a veteran would have with the mental health care system in Palo Alto. And so the presentations are going to be varied, but depression, anxiety, trauma, those sorts of things. But it's really their first point of contact with mental health services. So students aren't necessarily doing a deep dive into the mental health. They're really preparing the veterans for potentially doing the deeper dive later and transferring into, for example, the PTSD clinic or a substance use clinic, or maybe a behavioral medicine clinic if medical concerns are primary to the mental health presentation. And so we typically have students that train in that clinic that are really interested in they're interested in working with adults and perhaps trauma. So those are our first primary practicum experiences that we have in year 2. And then in year 3 and 4, we expand much broader than those placements. And some of the sites that we work with are listed below. We have a number of sites that we call captive sites that work only with our program. And so students have the opportunity to work at placements like Stanford Inpatient Unit, the outpatient clinic at the Stanford Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Department. There's also a placement at Lucille Packard Children's Hospital at Stanford working with pediatric populations, so kids and adolescents that are struggling with medical conditions. We have a site on Stanford's campus that provides time-limited outpatient care for faculty and staff and their loved ones. And that's called the Stanford Faculty Staff Help Center. There is a Stanford affiliated program at the East Palo Alto Academy, which is a high school in East Palo Alto, where the mental health services are provided by Stanford faculty, and our students are able to train there. The Palo Alto VA, there are a handful more, but we have a number of placements that are captive to our students where they receive really quality training. And then beyond that, in year 3 and 4, students also have the opportunity to train at a number of sites that are outside of our institution's walls, and we would call those external sites, and there are over 40 of them. And as I mentioned before, they really range a lot in terms of the types of setting, from community-based mental health services, school-based mental health services, whether that's an elementary school, a high school, college counseling centers. We have the Kaiser system is quite large in the Bay Area and throughout California. So that would be a medical system that provides mental health care. We have several other VAs in addition to the Palo Alto VA. We have San Francisco VA and then the Martinez VA. And then we have other medical systems like UCSF, which has placements both in San Francisco and then also in Oakland. And there are many, many others. So I think generally students, especially if they have a niche, you're able to find it in terms of our training sites here. So I feel like clinical training is an amazing opportunity in the consortium. There are so many different options. And because this is a PsyD student or a PsyD program, our students are really drawn to these opportunities that the program provides. So in that 5th year, students are training at their internship site for their final clinical training year. The internship placement, as you may know, is a full-time clinical placement, so 40 hours, maybe 40 plus hours per week. And the process is a match process where you apply to sites throughout the country and interview, you rank the sites, they rank you, and then you're matched, very similar to what happens for medical school for residency matching, only where this is only for 1 year as opposed to 4 years for residency. But our match rates are very strong in our program, as you can see from this slide. So over the past, let's see, 7 years, we've done very well across the years with our students' match rate. And as I mentioned, we do have that internship prep course or seminar that really is designed to help to support students throughout the internship application process. And it's coupled with not only a class where students are able to meet in a group and receive instruction about how to move through the process, but then also each student is assigned a coach that works individually with that student, depending on the questions that each student may have in the process. So this looks like our cohort that just graduated, our class of 2023. And I think one of the privileges for me as a faculty member is being able to work with so many amazing students. Our students are really very talented and, you know, obtain many amazing opportunities. And it's interesting over the decade of being in this position where I've been able to see now some of our students are directors of training for internship programs or for perhaps other doctoral programs, and or supervising our students in different practicum training sites. So it's fun to see that over the years, but they look lovely. And so this is data looking at our EPPP outcomes. So post-graduation, so those students that we just saw are likely now completing their postdoc position and thinking about taking the licensing exam to become licensed in whatever state they're going to reside in. Prior to taking your state's licensing exam, you must pass the EPPP. I forget what that stands for, but it is the psychology licensing exam. And this slide is showing the most recently published data. So EPPP will publish data on all the students that have taken this exam across doctoral programs for 2-year periods. And this was actually just recently published, I want to say in the last month, so they're already behind. But the most recently published data was from the 2-year period between 2017 and 2019. And we just like to point this out to show, if you look at the left-hand column, the pass rates. So the first row are students that took the exam from all accredited doctoral programs nationally. And then the second row is the students from our program that took, so 93 students from the PsyD Consortium took the EPPP exam in that 2-year window. And you can see the pass rate. So nationally, the pass rate for the first time taking the exam is 80%. And in our program, it's almost 95%. So our students do very well for their first time taking this exam. And in fact, most of our students do pursue licensure as well, because again, as a PsyD program, our students are very much interested in practicing as clinicians. And you can see as you sort of look across the different domains of content that are tested within this exam, so biological bases, cognitive and affective bases, et cetera, what the national scores are compared to ours, and we're above the average on all of them. And maybe most, or maybe it's not surprising, but the treatment and intervention column, you can see that's our largest positive difference at 8%, which makes sense because our program is so focused on the application of theory into practice, and our students really do get a tremendous amount of training in intervention and treatments. And one other thought is that for a PsyD program, we're equal to other programs in terms of the research methods and stats, which is amazing. And our program really is one in which, because of the two institutions, there are a lot of opportunities for our students to get involved in research, and they do get involved in research. So although this is a PsyD program, we like to say sometimes it's a PsyD plus, because our students do have access to and tend to take advantage of the opportunities to get involved in research.
All right, so now I want to take some time to talk about the PsyD admissions. So we also on our website, we have a lot more information, a lot of FAQs that explain in more detail, and also everything will be submitted through PsyCast, which is our centralized application system. And so that will also have more information as well on the required documents on the PsyD program is requiring. So some important key dates are the early consideration deadline, December 1st. And then we also have our regular consideration, January 7th. So students typically ask what are sort of the benefits, or if there is a benefit to applying by the early consideration. I always tell students to strive to apply by that date, because sometimes you might have delays in applying, submitting your material, or maybe your recommenders are taking a little bit longer than you expected. So it is better to just apply by that date. However, you have until January 7th to hit submit on your application materials. And for the early consideration, it doesn't mean that you will hear acceptance faster or anything like that. It pretty much means that your application will be among one of the first to be reviewed. And so typically they review applications in the order that they come. And so it's somewhat possible to maybe hear sooner if you are invited into the next step. But we always tell students that it could take several weeks to months before you hear anything. So that's sort of a little bit about the early consideration deadline information. And then here we have some recommended preparation coursework. And typically students that have some background in educational background or courses in psychology do fairly well, just because it does show sort of your commitment, but also your background in psychology. And we want to make sure that you are prepared for the field and the coursework. So it does sort of help. So if you've never taken psychology courses, I really do recommend that you do take these courses, or any psychology courses that you're interested in taking, and they're only recommended. So you don't need to take them, but you should if you don't have any educational background in psychology. And also, there is a very strong preference to applicants who have some form of clinical experience. So this, once again, does show that you understand what you're getting yourself into. It is a 5-year program. It is very long. And so we want to make sure that you're prepared and you know sort of what to expect in our program. And when people ask what clinical experience is fitting for applying, there is a very broad range of what could be considered. I usually say something in a helping profession, and some very popular examples are being working with a crisis line center, being a relief counselor, or even being an ABA therapist. So there is a range, and you could always reach out to me. I have a list of examples from previous students' experiences. And now going on to the application requirements. So like I said, everything will be submitted to PsyCast, which there is a link on our website, and nothing will be sent to Palo Alto University. So please keep that in mind. So we ask that you submit a resume or a CV, which typically that would show your past employment, volunteer experience that is relevant to the program, and also a statement of purpose, which the prompt will be available also on PsyCast in the documents section if you want to see the whole thing. But pretty much asking, it's going to ask, why are you interested in a PsyD and in clinical psychology? Also, how is this degree going to help you sort of reach your goals and help you in the future? And also we ask for 3 letters of recommendation. And so those letters should be from professional or academic recommenders, anyone that's known you in a more formal setting with supervisors, volunteer coordinators, managers. And we do ask, please do not use any personal references, so friends, family, your personal counselor, therapist, please do not use those because those are not what we're looking for. And then also we ask you to submit all your official transcripts from all colleges and universities you've attended. And those also will be sent to PsyCast. So it will let you do it through the application to send it directly. And if you're an international student, you might have to do that extra step of getting them evaluated and translated and through a service that's NACIS, a NACIS member, and then it'll be sent to PsyCast as well. And one thing to note is that we do have a lot of applicants that applied to our PsyD and our PhD program. And a popular question is, will that affect your application? Can I apply to more than one program? And I say apply to as many programs as you'd like. There are students that apply to both, or they might even apply to our master's in psychology or our MA program. And that does not affect your application. We want to make sure, you're making the right choice in what you want to do. And especially having a backup plan. Since this program, is known to be very highly selective and we have a high volume of applicants, it's good to, have, if you're considering applying to other programs, you definitely should. And there's two ways to go around it. If you are applying to specifically our PhD program, it will prompt you on PsyCast if you want to be considered for both. And the only extra step would be writing a personal statement that is catered to the PhD program and the PsyD program. And also, if you maybe submit your application and didn't apply to the PhD program and you want to, please reach out to admissions and we'll add that extra thing on your file of a personal statement as well. Right. And I don't know if Dr. Kent, you wanted to add anything to this or?
No, I think that was a great overview. I did realize though that one thing I didn't mention that I think is actually important to mention is that all of our clinically applied classes in the PsyD program are taught by faculty members who are actively licensed and currently practicing. And so that is a difference between, I think sometimes a PsyD program and a PhD program. I can say, for example, I did get my PhD, and in my program, none of my faculty members were licensed and hadn't seen patients maybe since they were an intern. And not to say that every program is that way, but for our program in particular, I think it brings a real richness to the class discussions when faculty members are actively seeing clients and providing mental health care, have their feet on the ground, and can bring that into the classroom discussion. So that is a requirement for our applied clinical classes. So those would be classes that are essentially teaching you about about therapies, individual therapies, things like CBT, ACT, DBT. I know I'm listing a bunch of acronyms. That's also something you'll get used to if you're in the field. And group therapies, those sorts of things, assessment. We do require our instructors are practicing. I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't know if it makes sense, Robin, if you wanted to read any that were in the chat or if there were things that weren't answered.
Right. I did see someone ask in the chat about if you would know the difference about, I think it was a clinical psychology MS program and then a clinical psychology MA program.
At PAU or just more broadly?
I guess more broadly was the question.
I believe the question was asking about how they're valued and if either one or the other prepares you better for the program.
Yeah. I mean, I think that any master's program in a mental health field would be valuable for sure. And it's also not required. And so we do have, I would say it's the minority of our students. Most of the students in our 30 student cohort do not come in with a master's degree already. But we have a handful of students every year that do have a master's degree. And it could be a master's in social work. It could be a master's in family therapy, MFT. It could be an MA and MS. I wouldn't say that any of those is valued more or less than the other. I think it's really more about, at this point in time, all of you are considering applying for a doctoral degree in psychology, and there's a reason why. and conveying that in your materials. And it could be that pursuing the master's degree helped to cement that for you, and that would be totally fine to talk about. But I wouldn't say that an MA versus an MS, that there would be more or less value placed on either of those.
Thank you. I know someone else, no, that question was answered. Oh, and then someone's asking about the GRE. Yes, the GRE is not required for this cycle. However, I always get questions about, will it be required for future cycles? Usually that's decided the summer, towards the end of summer, before the applications are open. So if you are applying for another year. And then let me just go over the next slide quickly. It's the last slide. So here, I just want to go over quickly about the sort of the timeline. So applications are open now for pretty much all our programs, and you could start applying on PsyCast. And usually like the early consideration deadline, December 1st. And then we do ask by January 7th, you click submit on your applications. So it doesn't mean that your recommenders need to be submitted by then, or your official transcripts need to be submitted by then. You have until January 21st to make sure you receive all your application materials. However, if you do submit after, it just pretty much means we can't guarantee that interview slots aren't filled by then. So please make sure to reach out to your recommenders as soon as possible. And typically the interviews are virtual, and they're held between January and March. And then they're also host in March and April, they host a admitted students open houses as well. And if you are interested in attending the program, please make sure to fill out your enrollment confirmation by April 15th. And one question that we always get a lot is, when will I hear back? I haven't heard back. It's been several weeks, it's been months. Since it is a very high volume applicant program, just know that when they have an update, they'll reach out to you. So you might not even hear as late as until the spring. So please keep that in mind. And once we have, answers for you or an update, you will hear back from us. All right, and then here, students sometimes might have questions about PsyCast because maybe they've never used it before, because you could use it to apply to other programs as well. And we have a deep dive, which is on our YouTube, which perfectly explains each section and how to submit certain parts. And so that's a really good resource. However, if you have more questions, you can reach out to me about any PsyCast program or admissions related questions. I could also connect you to a current student, which could be really helpful to ask specifics about, coursework and their experience and sort of their knowledge on the program. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing, and then we could look over the rest of the questions. All right, let me see what hasn't been answered. Yes, so does volunteering with the crisis text line count as clinical experience? Yes. That's something very accessible to students, for students to do, since you could do that, at home and virtually. How far back should the CV go? Dr. Kent, do you have any knowledge of, do you know if it's more seeing recent experiences rather than maybe experiences you've had maybe 5, 10 plus years ago?
Yeah, I would say that in general, you want to start with your college aged years and to date to present. So anything that happened during high school, for example, or prior to college, you typically would not have on your CV at this stage. If someone was coming into or applying for the program, maybe a second career, and we do have students who choose this direction after perhaps working in business or technology or many other fields. So you may have more work experience, and that's fine. We would want to see that. And for those students, we would also want to see that there's a commitment to psychology, and this was mentioned earlier, but perhaps through volunteering or crisis hotline, those sorts of things, to show that you've dipped your toes in this, you know what you're getting into. And again, 5 years is a long haul, so we want to make sure that you're committed. But I would say nothing before high school or before, making sure that your college years and above.
Thank you. And yes, if you apply to multiple programs, you're going to need different personal statements. Yes, and then there's an application fee within PsyCast, and the fee waivers, if you're asking for that, PAU doesn't offer any, but it would be through PsyCast that you would look for that.
I do see one question about interest in assessment and testing, and whether to apply for the master's program. I will say that the PsyD program tends not to be focused on neuropsychological assessment or forensic assessment. And the PhD program at PAU does have specific emphasis or tracks in those areas. So we tend to recommend students that know that that's going to be their area of interest apply to the PhD program instead. And then I think if you're in that boat, at that point, you could decide, would a master's level degree make more sense for me first, or a doctoral degree? Again, there's a difference in the time commitment there, and demonstrating that you're committed to the field, I think, is very important if you're going to jump to the doctoral degree in terms of your application. And that would be true for the PsyD or the PhD. But just as a caveat, our PsyD program is not focused on, or tends not to be focused on, neuropsychological testing training or forensics, whereas the PhD program does specifically offer those trainings. That being said, we sometimes have students that develop those interests over time, but I would say the bulk of students that are interested in those paths are in the PhD program.
Thank you. And I know one thing to note is I always recommend students that reach out to me to look at the faculty list and also look at their experiences and see if maybe you find someone similar or somewhat of interest in you. And, you could definitely talk about that in your personal statement of, why you are interested in applying in the PsyD program. And also, we are a little bit different in terms of how do you apply. You're applying to university. You're not applying to like a specific faculty member. So that's one thing to keep in mind, because a lot of students ask, should I reach out before applying to a faculty member and stuff like that? And usually you'll end up being directed back to admissions. So please keep that in mind. It's to the university. Also, are there typically older students in the program? What is your experience, I guess, with people of like different backgrounds and ages?
Yeah, I think it's really important for our program that we embrace diversity in all sense of the word. And so we're really looking for diversity across the board in terms of our 30 student cohort combination of students. And I would say that in terms of age, as I mentioned, we do have students that join the program after having a career in some other field, and then decide that field is not right for them and make a choice to commit to psychology. And oftentimes those students may be a little older than some of the other students. So I think that if the student is, or the applicant is interested, it's the right fit, telling your story and your application about why this is the right time for you, why you're committed to this degree path, is really important. And age is not going to be the factor that determines whether or not you're offered an interview or admitted.
Thank you. And then also, yes, there are international students that are in the program. And one thing I will say, if you are an international student, we will definitely support you here. Lisa Harris is a really good resource for you to reach out to. She's our international specialist, and she'll definitely help you through the process with the visa and everything if you're coming from somewhere else. But while you're in the program, we'll definitely make sure you get all the same experiences and practicum and trainings as everyone else. And there's a question if there's any coursework or any training that you would have to do over the summer, or anything that's done over the summer.
So for the PsyD program, we do not have any classes that are during the summer quarter. Your practicum placements, however, once you're in that second, third, fourth year, your practicum placements likely will continue in the summer months. Every placement may have slightly different start and end dates, so it may depend on exactly where you are training. If you are, for example, on practicum or at a practicum site the entire summer, maybe you have a couple of weeks off because one placement ended the end of June and the next one starts August 1st, for example, something like that. But I would say you should count on being you're really a full-time student that entire 5 years, but we give you a break with classes during the summer, which I think is nice. You can orient to your practicum without having to fold in the class piece at that time.
Thank you. And student is asking how much research is in the PsyD program, and if you were, and what are sort of the research opportunities within the program?
Yeah, so I would say again that our program is a PsyD program, so the focus is going to be much more on the clinical training. But that being said, because of the nature of the consortium and having this relationship between the two different institutions, one of which is, of course, Stanford's Department of Psychiatry, there's a tremendous amount of active research that's happening at both institutions. And then we have partner institutions, like I mentioned, the Palo Alto VA, where students also get involved with research projects. And so we typically send out, as faculty reach out to us and say, hey, I'd love to have a student join my lab or help with this research project. We send those opportunities out to our PsyD students as we're made aware of them from faculty. And, I would say in our program, all of our students, 100% of our students are committed to the clinical training. They want to get involved in seeing patients, learning treatments, intervention. The research side is a little more variable, where we have students who enter the program and right away join a research lab. And honestly, by the time they graduate, on paper, they look like a PhD student because of the research commitment that they had during grad school. Whereas we might have another student who completes their dissertation, which is the requirement for our program, of course. And that's it. And that's also okay. So there's some variability in terms of how students approach research, but I would say there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, and it's up to each individual student how they choose to take advantage of that.
Thank you. Also, another question is, how much contact do students get with faculty mentors, or how much time do you spend working with them?
Yeah, I think that, we have a number of different ways that students are able to connect with faculty. And as Robin mentioned earlier, unlike a PhD program where you join a lab from maybe year one and you're in that lab the entire time, and the leader of that lab, that faculty member, really is your mentor, your person throughout grad school, this is a little different. And so each student has an academic advisor that they are matched with during year one. So as soon as you join in the fall of year one, you'll have an academic advisor. And that person is a faculty member who works with you, meets with you, talks about your coursework, your clinical interests, making sure you're on track academically throughout the program. In addition to that, you'll be at your practicum sites where you have your clinical supervisors. And I find for a lot of our students that the relationships that they build with their clinical supervisors are very intimate, or can be very intimate. You're spending an hour a week one-on-one with that person for a full year. And so sometimes those individuals can become mentors. The student might stay in touch with that supervisor as they advance in their program, and could really provide professional development and support to that student as they continue to advance. You'll also have your dissertation chair later in the program. And that person, of course, you're working with on your dissertation project, and they're very much focused, of course, on you completing the project and providing support throughout that. So in some students' cases, it could be that those different roles, there's overlap where it might be one person who's taking on different roles, and for another student, it could be multiple people. So I think it may depend on the student. But Kirsten, I'm curious if you have any thoughts about that piece in terms of your experience, the mentorship piece.
Oh, yeah, I can absolutely speak to that. Sorry, I'm trying to.
Yeah, no, thank you. I love that you're answering the chat questions.
There are quite a few in there that I left for you because I wasn't sure. But I can definitely speak to student experience that I've got. So as it relates to mentorship, I was actually really confused about that coming into the program, to be honest, because I didn't come to an open house and didn't ask that question. So it's a good question. You don't end up working with someone like specifically when you come into the program, as Dr. Kent said, but really you build a lot of different mentorship relationships. I personally would consider my main mentors to be one of the professors that I had first year, who I then TA'd for. She's incredible and I work pretty closely with her. She's really supported me a lot just on like any application I've done. She's like gotten coffee with me, like really gone out of her way. And then my clinical supervisors have also been my main mentors, which I believe Dr. Kent had mentioned as well. And then when you do start working on your dissertation, that person definitely serves a mentorship role. And I didn't meet my dissertation chair until end of third year, or well, middle of third year. And so, you know, you can build those relationships earlier through like supplemental practicum or research experiences that you seek out. But you don't necessarily have to have those. And so I guess I would say that there are a lot of different ways that people find mentorship in the program. But I don't know anyone who doesn't feel like they have some sort of mentorship in the program. And then some people really connected with their advisors and work really closely with them. Other people, the advisor is a great kind of check-in point, but isn't necessarily someone that they're like always working with. And that's fine too. I think I'd say it's kind of a create your own adventure, but you can find mentorship in a lot of different places, which I think is kind of nice because then you're getting mentorship in a lot of different experiences.
Right, thank you. I know a lot of students are asking if there's jobs within PAU and Stanford. And yes, we have students, we have some students that are working at admissions or being a TA, and they typically work about no more than 20 hours a week, sometimes 40, depending if it's, you know, like a school break. But yes, there are a variety of roles that you could do to sort of help with expenses and tuition. But I really recommend students, if they want to talk about funding, scholarships, and those paid positions, to please reach out to financial aid. They could definitely give you more of a rundown and more information regarding those positions. And I do see that we have about less than 2 minutes now. See if there's any questions we could answer. I guess I had a quick question for Kirsten. If you have any like experience working, if it's possible to work during the program, or you know anyone that is working through the program.
I do. I know quite a few people who are working through the program, not full-time jobs or anything. It's an intensive program. You're spending a lot of time working through the program, like with practicum and classes and all of those things, but it is possible to work. There are some like opportunities within PAU and within the PsyD program. Like I'm one of the student council representatives, and that's a paid position. TA positions, those are paid positions. And then I have one friend who works as a teacher, like online. And so he does all of his grading. It's like an online school. And so he mostly does like grading and stuff. And he does that on the weekends and in the mornings. And so there are a lot of different ways that people kind of make some extra money on the side. But I don't know anyone who's working like any sort of full-on job. I don't see how that would be possible, if I'm being totally honest.
Thank you. Yeah, so we are coming to a close. I just want to say my email is in the chat. Please reach out to me since we had a lot of questions today. And we also will have 2 other open houses in the first Saturday of the next coming months. And it'll be during the same time slot. So I just want to thank Kristen for being here and being awesome, answering the chat questions and taking time out of her Saturday, but also Dr. Kent for being here and you know, talking about the PsyD program and spending her Saturday morning with us. So thank you so much for being here, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their Saturday. Thank you.